Hey everyone, this is Scott. On this episode of The Union, I talk with John about the variance of knowledge, right? So some people understand very expert topics and advanced topics about machine learning, predictions, things like that. And then some people ask us questions like, what does LLM stand for? How much is a token worth? And things like that. So John tells some great stories on enterprise brain and some of the questions that we get about automation, AI, machine learning. And so I hope you enjoy this episode. I wanted to talk about kind of the breadth of everyone's knowledge. On one end, you have researchers testing the latest models for all these things, right? And figure out how to use them. On the other end, you have people asking about what AI terms mean. Where does everybody fit in the middle? That's how I thought we were going to kind of frame it, but I'll listen to your story.
So the preconceived notions of how AI should work is another one of those. Just like how people don't understand, there's a wide variety of understanding around AI. There's a vast gap in really grounding people's understanding of what Gen AI is really capable of doing and how it really works. And then the the piece that I could add to that story is an actual customer did buy with the expectation, I gave you all my content. You said that Krista would learn what my content doesn't have. Why is your software continuously bothering our people to answer these questions? Like, well, because Krista needs to learn from your people. If the content's ambiguous or it's missing, it has to go somewhere to get it. So it's been configured to ask you. Like, well, Krista's supposed to learn. If it was going to ask me anyway, why would I even have this? Like, well, let's address that in a second. Where do you want it to get the answer if not from the content you gave or the people you have on staff? I don't know. You told me it was going to learn. Like, okay, but you learned how? Either by reading or by being told. Krista's the same way. You either need to give Krista the information or you need to tell Krista the information. There's no mystical, I'll just make it up for you. You can't have a place where it says, what's your policy on X? And Krista doesn't have that information and makes up the policy on X. No, I don't want her to make it up. I want her to know it and to say it. Like, but how would Krista know this? And we went around like this for 30 minutes. This was an actual customer call. And where it lands is certain words that when we say it, we understand a certain meaning. When we say learn, we mean we're either providing vast amounts of content or training material, like literal data science style training material. But if you say that to a layperson, they think here comes the warm and glowing fuzzy AI, you'll just learn. So, you know, what you said during the sale, learn from my people. I didn't think you meant literally like make them answer. I I mean, these were and by the way, this wasn't a belligerent call. This wasn't this is not an incompetent person in most walks of life. This is just someone who had no idea that what they were being told was you would have to be a part of your success in the solution and the gaps and the misunderstandings related to, in this particular case, knowledge management have to be resolved somehow, not through, you know, Ouija boards or whatever, however else we were supposed to come up with the answers to these policy questions.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting because when they started using Gemini, ChatGPT, or, probably before Grok even came out, like all of a sudden it just knew stuff. So they weren't aware of the learning aspect, maybe. And so maybe they just assumed that, okay, this thing already knows everything. And it's going to learn. And maybe if it learns, it goes by itself and learns, right? And that's not at all what you want, right? Because you want it to want it to know your business rules, your context. And so how did that turn around? So did you explain? learning from a data science or learning from a like in school?
No, I stuck with school, because as soon as we go data science on them, we lose them completely, and they have, frankly, they have the right to say, "That's your game, that's not my game. Your game is make this work, please." And so what we did was we've had to have this conversation with plenty of customers that they are significantly, uh, contributing to the success of their project. If not, it's a it's a it's quite possible they could land on one of the 90% of projects that do fail. But we have a great track record, but it requires customer involvement. That involvement is almost the single biggest indicator of success of the project or not. And it is because of things like this. So just getting super practical, when we help them understand we're repairing these holes in your content or these ambiguities in your content once and for all. Because in the knowledge management world, we don't need 30 samples or 60 samples of a particular labeled data in order to get confidence up. If we get a definitive, the policy is X, the policy is X, right?
Right.
So so that so what we have been telling customers for years already, but somehow they miss this part, is we deploy at a lower level of accuracy then we will reach pretty quickly. And you will be highly involved in that closing of the accuracy gap. And whether it's machine learning based or it's knowledge management, in both cases, they have the same kind of rapid growth from, let's say, 60, 70, 80% accuracy into the 85, 90, 95% plus, even sometimes accuracy. But that is very much a customer burden and it's not one we can take away from them because what we're doing is we're filling in all the gaps and we're ironing out all the wrinkles in their data set or their knowledge base. And what they don't realize is that if they don't go through that process, they don't come out the other end with the value of what AI can really do for them. So these guys were a couple of weeks in where it was probably as bad as it's ever going to be. And I totally understand. Hey, you were supposed to deflect all of these very important, very timely, I need answers types of questions. We were supposed to be running this thing at machine speed, right? Isn't that what you guys say? It's like, yes. And some of them already are. But those that are not yet well understood by the software, well represented in the knowledge management system, are going to have to go in front of people, or you're going to have to provide some other kind of call out. Maybe there's another repository of information you can make available. But that's where we say, hey, give it another couple of weeks. Because if you follow the path that most customers do, there's a there's obviously this initial large number of gaps that are identified, but then they trend down fairly quickly. And within a few weeks, you realize that it's much lower. And then after another few weeks, you don't remember getting a interruption from Krista for days. And at that point,
Yeah.
you know you're in pretty good shape. Now, I would still add, there's never 100%. And the reason why there is never 100% is because most businesses are too complex for there to ever be one point in time where everything gets known, right? And as soon as that would be the case, the world would change. And then, of course, content is no longer accurate and needs to be repaired. So we've gotta keep that customer involved. But that is a really good example of they thought they understood, and, I wasn't myself involved in that particular sale, but I know the phrases our sales team used. They were very correct, but the understanding was completely different. When they were saying, "Crystal will learn from your people," that didn't translate. Now, you might think that has an obvious understanding, but it didn't to those folks because they thought, "No, no, that would be normal. This is AI. It won't go that way. It'll go the AI way where they'll learn from our people." Like, "Okay, but what would that actually mean then?" Right? And that's where the gap comes. It sounds silly, and I'm sorry for anyone that I feel like is I'm offending. I don't mean to do that. I mean to do the opposite. I mean to tell you it's those who live on a podcast like this that totally understand this and spend enough time with it to recognize There's no magic. An LLM is making a prediction about the next syllable. A token is essentially a syllable. And all it's of course, we've built massive capabilities with it, but what it is doing is a very practical, predictable, mathematical thing. It didn't come up with a new science. I sound silly even saying this, but the questions that we get actually when you put them against the science are silly. So maybe that's where we have to go.
Yeah, it's I mean, the aha moment from like an expert's perspective on the level of understanding, like is it's probably just as big as the guy confused on the other end, right? And you have to meet in the middle somewhere. I can't think of an example right now, a personal example, but I've explained this to someone and they tried to explain it back to me. I'm like, wow, I know. I didn't really know where you were. Okay, let me back up a little bit.
Yes.
Um, so it's
Yes.
it's really, really hard, right? Especially when, the AI pundits are talking about the latest this and that, and this model creates images better, and things like that. Most of the market is nowhere near that, right? They're more closer to, like, you were in a meeting with some executives and kind of going through this, and they stopped you, right, to ask you what some AI term meant. Like, what was that story?
Oh, there's 100 of these, and there'll be a time where someone will say, uh, "So what do you mean by prediction?" Right? "What do you mean by generation? What does LLM stand for?" Um, my favorite question, and again, I do not mean to offend anyone or make anybody think that I'm laughing behind their back, because I'm doing the opposite. I'm really sympathetic to a super intelligent person, had a really successful career, knows a ton of things I have no clue about, right? Capable of spinning my head around with the complexity that he's comprehended in his career. But about halfway through a meeting, stops and says, "Look, I know this will sound silly, but you have other customers, and Krista's already doing lots of good things, I imagine, for those other customers. And here we come along. How do we know that Krista's not gonna, like, prefer the old existing customer to us and do a better job for them than Krista would do for us?" And at that moment, it really dawned on me, we even perpetuate this. We're all in this business putting very human sounding voices to our AI. We're absolutely crushing this notion of humanizing AI. And here he did, right? He went right along with the Kool-Aid. And he's thinking now that there'll be personal bias, not even through training data per se, but through experience of a singular notion of Krista that is working for many companies at the same time. And I don't know if I kept my composure perfectly or not, but I sure do appreciate that he didn't feel like I came down on him. And this was fun, right? In a way. How do you get on your toes and help this gentleman understand it's not even close to what you're thinking? I mean, you're just not even there's Earth, and then there's where you are. And how do I'm about to try to go intergalactic, right? How am I gonna do that?
Yeah.
Where this landed, Scott, was actually pretty cool. It's like, you know what? Think of Krista as like a robot that gets cloned, right? We're cloning Krista for each customer, and we call them tenants, right? It's like in a SaaS application, you have tenants, and each tenant is, our practice, and of course, we even get audited to confirm this. No tenant's data can see other tenants' data. So your Krista won't even know that there's another company that Krista works for and that it is actually in a competitive field with you. So there will be no even opportunity for this. But it's a little more even than that. And this is where I really think I got a chance to really help him see something. Krista's only input is what you give. If you actually tell Krista to prefer your competitor, and now let's talk about pricing, you may actually get poor pricing advice from Krista. But you wouldn't do that, right? You would do the exact opposite. You would say, "We're the best in our industry, and we deserve a great price, and we are blah, blah, and this is what I need you to do. Now interrogate my systems for all of the places where we can do whatever it would be." And that helped a lot. The notion of cloning and that the base knowledge is something like the capability knowledge around capabilities comes with Krista, but they essentially fill Krista with whatever knowledge is needed. That made the it made it through, right? And I guess I felt pretty good about that. What I didn't feel good about is when I came away from that meeting thinking, "We're just blowing by 80% of the population. We're just blowing right on by them." I mean, most people are barely using an LLM as a surrogate for search on the web, which is a very rudimentary use case for LLMs. And then to your point a minute ago, you know, the the folks who we all hang out with are talking about solving for humanity's last exam. And it does there's no that gap is getting wider faster. I
Yeah,
think
maybe those two guys could get together. The one that thought that Krista learning by herself was learning on a competitor business, and hopefully they're in the same industry, selling, I don't know, airplane parts or whatever they're selling.
we d we would, we would make the news in a way I do not wanna be associated if Krista started mouthing off at one of our customers because they prefer the other one.
Yeah,
But it sure
yeah,
would
it
be
would.
funny to make a fictitious setup for that and to see what it would be like.
Yeah, I don't remember was the Joaquin Phoenix movie Her? I don't know. Maybe something like that happened in that movie. That was a long time ago, but he was always arguing with her, or she was offering great advice. Um, but that is, yeah, it's interesting to understand the gap in the understanding. People not in the industry, I feel like, some of them, like, they only know Chat GPT and they think it knows everything, but it's just like you said, a surrogate web search, instead of Google. And it's, where do you think, like, enterprise buyers are? So if you have, obviously they're, like, let's take it past the awareness level, right? They understand the public LLMs. Hopefully they understand, okay, don't put company information in there because no one reads the terms and conditions of those things anyway. And then you have, on one end, you have companies like, like the CPG companies or Walmart have been, they have huge data science teams and have for decades on buying patterns, whether, shopping patterns for certain weather. Like my favorite example is the strawberry Pop Tarts at Walmart, right? When a hurricane comes, they sell more strawberry Pop Tarts and they know this and, stock them. But the enterprise buyer, if you were going to give it like a 0 to 100 scale, where do you think the average is, and then where maybe the median?
Ah, well, I'd love to be generous, but let's be grounded here. This is like a 10 or 20 on a scale to 100. And a lot of it is, of course, like any relatively new technology. AI has been around forever, but LLMs have matured. We've rewritten Moore's curve on Gen AI model progression. So if you go back to 2021, the earliest models that are now we're seeing the 5th, 6th, 7th generation of, you're but that's just an incredible rate of acceleration and capabilities. The people are people are listening too much to the sci-fi aspect. They're filling in the blanks with sci-fi movies. They're they're listening to vendors who say, not well-grounded things. Right? I mean, I won't name the company, but the guys who get on TV with 2 famous actors and just say, "If so and so were doing that for you, if so and so agent was doing that for you, then blah, 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 blah." You know, that's just gibberish, man. I mean, that's total gibberish. So what are we doing, right? We're taking we're taking an undereducated population, even in the enterprise, even in the procurement teams, where we're jamming overly marketing, inflated types of 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 babble at them, and we're moving so fast that it actually sounds like it's true, right? It's like when Elon says, "My model is the smartest person that is smarter than any person that then will ever live or exist." What does that tell people? Oh, well, then it's all-knowing. It's just, I should just go warm up to it, and hopefully it's nice to me. I mean, that's the right? I mean, that's the who's the super genius in the movie? The evil one,
Yeah.
right?
And then, yeah, hopefully I'm nicer to it than the other guy, right?
Right,
So
right.
you when it's stroke
We're back to our CFO. Yeah, it doesn't take much to realize that that's a and hey, I'll be candid. Those earliest times when I'm prompting a model for the first time, this is many years ago, but even then it's like, if I prompt it this way, it goes down a path I don't want it going down, and it's not remembering this now, but of course, we're gonna wire this up to a database at some point, and it's gonna know. So I don't know if I wanna bring that up with an LLM. It's like, "Oh my gosh, John, go stop. You're doing exactly what, you need to be teaching people not to worry about. And if you wanna erase memory, you just erase memory, right?" It's yeah.
Yeah.
It's easy to succumb to this because 'cause we're personalizing it on purpose.
Yeah, it is. And we play with it every day, right? So, I mean, I remember the first time I was using um I guess it was just the first ChatGPT, and the second is, just like learning how to prompt, right? So like we had an episode about the $900,000 prompting engineer. I think it was like Airbnb was advertising for somebody like that. I don't know. It was a California company. I'll look it up. Because prompting was such a big deal, right? Stuffing it full of context. And I remember someone was watching me write a prompt, right? And it was always like asking it questions and telling it to check back with me because I didn't want it to drift and hallucinate in a certain area, right? So like, hey, check in with me. Am I making sense? And they're like, why are you doing all of this? This is not how you do it. I was like, okay, you can do it the other way, but I learned the other way doesn't work, right? Because it drifts so fast, so far. Now they've gotten much better, right? Like I prompt much differently now than I did, 3 years ago. And now with the local client and everything, it's become easier, but it still is not all knowing, right? Because I have like I have those source documents for things that we create, but the clients don't reach across projects or folders, right? So the all-knowing is like it's so far-fetched that I just don't know how people get there, right? And so like I'm the opposite one that you're talking about. Like I don't even understand how you got there, and you don't understand like why I'm doing what I'm doing. I think but we have to meet in the middle. But the the business aspect of it is, we have to figure out how this stuff hits the balance sheet, right? Like how do I make a process run better that doesn't need the check-in, right? It did learn and it runs by itself, and I'm making dollars instead of pennies because I've reduced all the bottlenecks. I mean, that's the real goal, but it doesn't seem like people are thinking that way.
Where there doesn't seem to be enough of that happening, so that might be the issue. You know, we produce a business case for every transaction that we do, and we do that even when the customer doesn't want to because, "No, no, no, this is so obvious." Well, we've decided that obvious is not enough. We wanna see it for ourselves. And the reason is clear. We need to make sure that we're taking a customer down the best path that they could be going and getting them on their journey, they're in the right direction. And now many are either doing a certain amount well and continuing, or they're now seeking a second or third attempt because they've been blowing cash and not achieving much. And you mentioned a minute ago that it's just far fathom, or fantastic to imagine that AI is all knowing or an LLM is all knowing. But and yet, even we message this whole notion of enterprise understanding and getting Krista to understand the entirety of your business. Now, I hope that doesn't translate into, I just said that Krista is all knowing. Like, no, we want Krista to be incredibly knowledgeable about every aspect of your business that's possible, because that makes Krista incredibly effective at the things you want Krista to do. And without that knowledge, you certainly don't get the right outcomes that do end up with people in the loop all the time. It was a incredibly good example just a few minutes before we started this podcast, where we're dealing with, this is a super geeky thing. I'm sorry if I'm about to lose my audience. Sorry. But MCP has no type safety on the response of a tool call. So when you're using tools, which is basically how you go agentic with Gen AI, when you've given a Gen AI model a task and you say use tools to go, or it's implied. So maybe you're telling it it's allowed to go read your files or go into your system or go create that PowerPoint or whatever it is. You're, those tools have a fairly well-defined input, but it is optional. And in fact, most MCP servers do not even provide any kind of structured output. Well, you realize that that is terrible mess. That just literally makes MCP an inappropriate use for an enterprise trustworthy, can run it transactions per second. Don't think TPS means tokens per second. It means transactions per second to a real business person. And when you're thinking about that, you've got to have structured, typed information. If you don't, you've always got to have a human in the loop. Is did it get this right? Did it parse this right? Is this really what did this response come back the way I needed it to? And instead, without type safety, the response side. Now, there's just one of 100 little examples about why people who rush into agentic without understanding and without a recognition that these are very immature tools are failing. And where people are now just, this reminds me of the old RPA movement. Like, yeah, we shifted people off of the out of the swivel chair. Now we've got one guy looking at a really big screen and trying to keep it running.
Yeah,
It's
he's
all
he's
we did
looking
was
at rows in a
shifted.
spreadsheet to make sure, the bot didn't, incorrectly type it in there. Yeah, it's just I mean, you didn't reduce any work, you just kinda, like, moved it
Shifted
over.
it from one job skill to another, and
Yeah.
and not necessarily at a reduction in the labor cost, so that so we're just sort of still playing those games out where we're rushing in and doing things not necessarily right, and that and the data showing it. So we're obviously trying to make good on, let's get people grounded. Let's make sure that when we say a phrase, we're not implying something that is a sci-fi movie reference. We're actually implying something that has a practical meaning. Let's make sure that there is a real business case here so that you get a win and you get the house money to spend on the continuation of that journey, because we think that there are going to be a handful of companies in each industry that actually nail this ability to transform with AI, and the rest are in jeopardy, genuine jeopardy. And we really believe that. I mean, nowhere is that more obvious than in the software bit business. We're obviously playing this out ourselves. I think we're just first, and that's, by the way, ironically, because we're the simpler one to tackle like this. um, Most businesses work in a much bigger scope of how they need to automate, and software companies actually have a fairly tight scope to what needed to be automated, which is the construction, support, and changing of software. That is totally rewriting the economics of software companies right now, and it is rewriting ours, and it's something that we are absolutely being changed because of. No business will 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 survive or will sidestep that process. and you've got to embrace it and be good at it. Um, so with that as the stakes, this this it becomes very important to help people. Getting all the way back to the reason we started this conversation, we got to get people really well grounded. And when we stay at this superficially high level and we're just babbling at them with things that sound too good to be true, then they're just gonna make the leap, and they're not gonna understand, and they're not gonna and then their expectations are gonna be completely destroyed, and it's gonna seem like right? So, I hope we can do something to settle it down. We're not gonna slow down. I just wanna settle down the rhetoric, get really practical. Capabilities speak, right? Not, "Hey, it could" when you think about some of the incredibly bold claims of what people say, right? Um, you don't go to X for the truth. In most in of course, there's stuff that is true on X, just like there is some amount of truth on pretty probably every one of the social media sites. But there's a whole lot of, we'll just say, creatively prompted Gen AI output that's landing on X that has nothing to do with reality, and it's just the storyteller Gen AI model. But a lot of people take that as gospel, and are assuming, "Yeah, yeah, let's do that."
Yeah. So, and we've talked about throwing, a future vision, and we're talking to companies about the enterprise brain and, enterprise understanding and, just basically having a context to help you, with decisions and processes. What is, and we told the story in the last podcast about, a brain example, but what's been some of the feedback? And when we talk about learning and you throw the brain out there, and, we have been talking about the all knowing, is like what have people told you about that? Like, do they understand it? Do they desire it? Like, what's the feedback?
So brain is cutting both ways, and I was, concerned about this, and it's founded because it actually does, uh, make a little bit more challenging for those who are trying to get a handle on what all of this kind of I know these words, but they're used in different ways than I'm used to. There's a So an enterprise brain is like, okay, so is there like, where is it? What is it? Do I go touch it? And of course not, right? It's a concept, and it's an approach, and it does construct something, but it's more of a fabric of integrated capabilities and data, not an individual thing you can put your finger on. So the fact that it's abstract makes it a little bit of a challenge to begin with. But when you explain that it really must progress, starting with understanding, then progressing to reasoning and policy and procedure and compliance and all that, and then ultimately outcomes that can be orchestrated based on that understanding and reasoning, that makes a ton of sense. And it does demystify the process that we have to go through to get from, okay, we're all still running around with tablets and stones and whatever, and sticks and stones, and we're trying to get to some really elevated level of sophistication and technology. That is a way to do it. That process will get us there. The the notion we've said for, I mean, since our founding, that people are your integration strategy, and that is your biggest fundamental problem. When you think about how to make that no longer the case, the process of, well, there's gotta be a brain other than the one in all of your people, and that brain has to have the capacity to understand, to reason, and to act, and it pretty much has to happen in that order, because if you do it in the opposite order, you get sort of mayhem.
Yeah, it would, from a physical example, it would be like you really thinking that you need to take one step, and then you really think that you need to take another step. Like, as people being the integration strategy, but that was because like there's too many applications in all of these businesses, right? They were built to solve really small problems. Nothing works across it. Then you put AI on top of everything, and those apps just get taller, right? the the uh, the the technical requirements become more complex, and nothing works together. But a fabric like your nervous system, I mean that makes sense. But hopefully, the enterprise brain takes a shorter time to learn than ours, right? So what's ours? 25 years, and your brain stops growing. So we're probably 2.5 months, hopefully, pretty soon.
I would think this is the type of brain that's gonna actually have the opportunity to genuinely evolve, right? Ours will take eons, and this one will be reconstructed, every 18 months or even less. The capabilities that are woven together by an enterprise brain are certainly growing at an unbelievable pace, which is a great thing. And if you're a business that has positioned itself to take advantage of the changing pace of technology that is now inhuman, and so now you have technology that embraces it for you, that again, these as concepts do make a ton of sense. So the concept behind build your enterprise brain. You can't buy it. You need to build it. And that build is not a 5-year software engineering thing. That is a start with a single use case and then spread and make sure that you are thoughtful about how you spread. Um, that becomes, I think, also really practical. But how we describe it as a brain, I think makes sense once you are ready to really kind of embrace the reason why we describe it as a brain. But to an outsider who's still trying to figure out, does Krista like me or not? Or is Krista gonna like my competitor more than me? Going and saying, let's build yourself an enterprise brain is like, now I'm just piling on, right? So, so I think again, getting to the fundamental point, I think we were trying to reach in this particular podcast, we're talking way over our audience. We're assuming they understand phrases that they have a completely different frame of reference than us. We've got to make sure that we're speaking their language. A a great example of that is I stump people all the time these days by saying, "What does TPS mean?" "Oh, tokens per second." No, it doesn't. It doesn't. That it means transactions per second to most everybody you're talking to, and you're throwing TPS around.
I've never
Do
even
not make
seen tokens per second written anywhere.
it. And but Gen AI models are all about tokens per second, well, that's the rate at which that they operate, right?
Yeah.
So you want a faster model, one that thinks a lot is gonna have a slower TPS than a blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So all of us, AI geeks are all wrapped up in TPS, and if you just, if you just, pop, what's TPS mean? And if you say tokens, not transactions, you are out of phase with most of the people you're trying to get to use you as a consultant, buy your software, employ you or whatever. But of course, there's a tokens per second is fine. What I'm saying is we've got to have the frame. We are the minority that has to have the frame of reference of the majority in order to help them become part of the majority, or for our understanding to become a part of the majority. And we're not doing it by continuing to have TV shows that are complete nonsense, or TV commercials that are complete nonsense, or ridiculous claims from celebrity models about what they're capable of doing, AGI kind of stuff.
Yeah, I would, I looked at the price of, the OpenAI models yesterday, because I was putting it inside of a presentation, and I just used the 5.4 price, which was $15 per million. I didn't check how many seconds that was, but that meter would go pretty fast. The 5.5, I don't recall, it was 20 something dollars, I think. Maybe it was $30. I don't remember, but that is, yeah, you'd have to have a high limit on your credit card. The faster they go and the more they charge. So
Yes. That that is a theme that has shown up in a big way, right? A lot of companies started with, well, hey, this thing is like, it's just a few bucks for 1,000,000 tokens. I mean, come on. Um, that's a lot. 1,000,000 tokens is like, the New Testament in the Bible. So we that's totally fine. We can get after it. And then by the time you realize that, yeah, well, you may see a handful of those tokens, but the work it did behind the scenes was a lot of those tokens, and your inputs are often quite a bit. It definitely rings up, doesn't it? And when and when there are too many stories out there, we don't need to repeat them. The guy that said, "Okay, I gave my company an annual budget of, a significant amount, and here we are in April, and I've exhausted that budget." That's when we start to realize, and so it is a fairly common thing, and the really funny part is these companies are hemorrhaging money right now. So we're not actually paying. We're paying a subsidized rate for what these guys are currently doing. Um, this is it's not gonna go like the dot coms, all right? I am not saying it's gonna go like the dot coms, but it is taking the path of the dot coms, which is I don't need to have profit. I need to have eyeballs. I need to get as many people on my model or as many people to my website. You tell that to all those people who paid less than retail for all and even less than gross cost, the distribution cost of products online, and then those businesses never had a chance, right? I know a company that I was consulting that was selling cars online in 1999 for a gross margin of a negative $1,750 on average. Like, wow, the more cars you sell, the faster you're gonna go out of business, huh?
Yeah, that happened to me with my auto insurance policy. It went up by almost 2, and I switched. I was like, "Okay, see ya," right? But I wasn't paying a subsidized rate. I was a customer for 20 years. But anyway, uh,
Wow.
yeah, yeah, really bad. So, Progressive, that's you. Um, well, well, I appreciate it, John, and, we did so we talked about basically the variance of knowledge in the market, the people we talk to, and we talk to, um, beginners and experts and anything in between. So I really appreciate your time and love the stories. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, anytime.